We'll invite our speakers back up for Q&A, and we'll now open the floor for any questions. Feel free to give us a hand raise for a mic.
I have a question for Mr. Heimberg. Based on your retail discussions with your growers that you advise, where do you think the farmer is sold on corn? Old crop, percentage sold on old crop corn and beans?
My biggest concern is that we're still behind. I would say we're probably in that 30 to 40% window, just from talking to guys. It was actually very alarming to me after the USDA report how many guys said, I got corn sitting around, what do we do? And so I wasn't hearing that prior to the report because I think the numbers are still out there. And that's going to be a wet blanket over the market. I do think that's some of the weakness we've seen this week as we got back to 430 on Friday and on March corn. Guys need some cash flow right now, so they're pulling the trigger, getting bins core, just getting things moving so they can get some cash flow in.
Question for John. On the corn, global demand, where is that going and what is the projection on that? Is that going to continue? And then the second question, I guess, is on soybeans. If we dominated every market outside of China, and just say China went to South America, does that make up the difference on export demand for soybeans?
Let me touch the soybean part of it first, and I'll get to the corn side. No. Okay, but that 12 million metric tons that we did get from the Chinese purchases helped immensely. Okay, the USDA was already forecasting a reduced Chinese impact into the total, and that total has now kind of been met of what the USDA was forecasting for the Chinese purchases for the year. Again, it still comes down to the global supplies, and we need that extra purchases from those traditional buyers of U.S. beans that haven't stepped into the marketplace. Again, the market is dictating. The cheaper beans are coming here sooner. A lot of waiting out right now for that Brazil harvest to kick in. There are some issues going on in Brazil at this time frame that are just a little bit different because of the strong crush capacity that we are seeing globally. Brazil is going to crush a record amount of beans this year. Argentina is going to crush record amounts of beans for bean oil this year as well. The independent crushers have been buying up early harvest numbers out of Brazil, which has limited some beans getting to the ports. I think that's a little bit of the strength we've been seeing in the market here, plus just the shipping of the beans that China has purchased from us. But again, there's going to be a point, though, where that supply is going to outweigh the marketplace, in my mind. Now, on the corn side, Mexico has obviously been the strongest buyer of U.S. corn. Some of the reasons is the fact that the cattle industry has not come across the border. They need that grain to feed those cattle down there. So when you see export inspections numbers and those totals, that doesn't include rail shipment. That includes only boats. So we don't, that number has been very good. I believe you're with the rail industry, correct? So, talking to elevators, I know rail rates have gone up in some regard too. Some of it is just the fact that corn needs to be moving by rail to those destinations, as well as getting corn to the East Coast. They've dealt with some weather conditions, so there's poultry operations and things of that nature that need corn as well. So the rail industry is very key in that. Does that demand continue? My concern was, like everybody in the marketplace, including myself, I did not see that report coming in terms of those numbers. I think the industry was built up for a fact that, hey, this corn crop's going to get smaller. U.S. corn's already driving the world export market. So with that, I'm fear is there was a lot of front loading going into that report in terms of export purchases. Does that sustain itself? It probably starts slowing down as we get into the second half of the year, especially with right now Brazil looking at a record corn crop. Argentina, even though conditions have gotten a little tougher, is still looking at a record corn crop. Those crops coming here as we get into the May, June, July, August harvest window.
Hi, I'm Bob Wills at Cedar Grove Cheese. So my question is about whether the beef on dairy thing is going to change the responsiveness of the market. And basically, if I've got a cow and I'm milking it and I know I'm going to have that revenue from beef down the road, I still have the decision, do I want to milk it 1 lactation, 2 lactations, 3 lactations, whatever. So at the point where you decide that you're losing money on milk, do you give up the second lactation? Do you give up the second calf and cash in on the beef quicker? And is that going to result in a faster decrease in the milk supply, especially in light of the capacity for production that's coming in? And is it going to lower the beef prices quicker?
That's a good question for you, Brenda. So I'm going to do a bad job answering it, so if you want to keep the microphone, we'll make sure we're on track. So if I understand correctly, is this high beef price going to increase the supply of milk? Is that the easy takeaway?
No, will it decrease it because there'll be a tendency to convert your cattle to beef quicker and give up the next lactation? We can have less milk, more beef than what we would normally anticipate because of the beef on dairy.
So I would say a lot of that is going to be driven by the structural response, the structure that you're in. Because if your processor says they need more milk and they need milk up to X amount, right? By golly, they're going to supply that, right? So I think it's the excess. It's the portion above that that's really going to change it, or like where that incentive is going to be. I would almost argue that I think it's more plausible that we'll get the opposite, that we'll get cows probably maybe sticking around a bit longer because they can push out that next calf, right? So where maybe you'd cull her now, but you know, we can get her bred back, we'll dry her off quick, throw her in the dry cow pen, we'll get a calf, milk her off the first 60, 90 days, and then we'll ship her, and then we'll get the calf plus the cow, right? I think we might be seeing more of that than people culling sooner. And part of the reason for that is I think there doesn't seem to be any apparent downside risk in the beef market during that time interval. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that seems to be some of the logic that's thrown out there.
I'll approach that then too from the beef price. So if you just look at it from the beef price, if you just say, okay, every dairy cow in the United States and takes every one of their calves and they go into the beef market rather than any replacement heifers, anything like that, recognize that that's still only at a maximum 25% of the animals, which we know that's not going to happen, right? So you're going to have heifers, you're going to have all of this, so we're already there. So even if you're increasing this beef and you're changing the structure on the dairy industry, you're going to be, you know, maybe you can add a little bit of from those animals, but it's going to really only decrease that beef price, that fresh retail beef price, by maybe a few cents on the dollar if you do that, but then look at the impact that it would have on the dairy. So, I mean, we're not going to get there. That's like the extreme. We're just not going to see dairies, even though that's one of the things that's being heralded right now, especially on some of the Western news, that, okay, we can suddenly increase all of this beef. It's just, that's, yes, those numbers are coming if you take every single one of those animals and put them towards beef. That's not, I don't see that happening. I don't see that happening.
And I think on some of this cow's questions, it's kind of the chicken or the egg, right? If you're a producer and times are tight, and you know you can pay a bill by selling a terminally bred calf, right? Or you can pay a bill by selling a cull cow. I mean, she better be open and not being bred back if, you know, if that math, if the cost of holding her is, you know, the same or equal or, you know, better to raise that calf. I think that's really the math that guys are doing right now is, you know, do I have capacity for her? Can I hold her? Is it cheaper to hold her and get that calf and then, you know, milk off and cull, or to cull now? So I think that's the math I think most guys are doing. I don't know if that answers your question again, but.
Okay. Dr. Botel, since last May, roughly 80,000 to 100,000 feeder cattle from Mexico have not entered the United States. Does Mexico have the feedlot capacity or the slaughter capacity to deal with that bulge of domestic animals heading towards slaughter weights? And might that meat, some of that meat show up as box beef coming into the U.S.?
You're right. You're like, we on an annual basis, so you're like, since last May, on an annual basis, it's about 1.2 million. So say it doesn't open, right? All those animals, you have the ones from last May. Right now, Mexico is somewhat increasing some of that, but that is going to be a concern on what is the slaughter capacity of whether or not they can harvest all of those animals. The next then too is like, well, you can maybe keep them for a while on the weights and some of that. So there's going to be some flux on there. And then where does that come from beef? Like, what do we import it? Right now, when we look at from the imports of beef, we're getting most of our beef from Brazil, from Australia. That's what we're getting our beef in from. Where we're getting, there is, just say as we continue to decline in our production, right? And if that demand stays there, we need that lean capacity. Is it going to be the increase? Because Brazilian and they're both those countries are increasing their production. So they're increasing while we're decreasing. The percentage that like Australia exports relative to their production is so high that there's probably not that much more growth potential. I mean, there's some, but in relative terms, it's going to more be coming from Brazil. But like you said, or is it going to come from Mexico? That's a question I can't really answer exactly what the capacity is for Mexico on their packing. Thank you.